Let me introduce our first speaker for the day. Ruth Valerio has a PhD from King's College London and an undergraduate theology degree, but if you've read her bio, you'll also see she's an eco-warrior and a community activist, an author, practitioner, veg grower, pig farmer, I believe, at some stage. Were you? Or are you still am?
He still is, okay.
Not, you need to know,
not quite a pig farmer, but...
If you need to know everything there is to know about keeping pigs, she's your person. She's the Director of Theology and Churches for Arusha, UK. If you haven't heard about that or know what it is, you will know by the end of her talk. She is passionate about engaging churches and church communities and individuals on what it means to care for God's creation, and she's going to talk about that now. So thanks very much, Ruth.
I am. Thank you, Hilary. Good morning. I can't believe what Hilary said, that by day 3 you might be beginning to slack and not quite turn up on time. You're enthusiastic, you're here, aren't you? You're ready for the day. And I know, well, I was going to say, I know we've got some good sessions coming up. The second session I know will be good. I can't speak for this one. But I've been given this very, what strikes me as a pretty unacademic title for a Faraday Institute thing on caring for creation, why bother? And that is what I want to look with you over this next time. I'm going to be speaking for 45 minutes, as is the usual way, and then you will be into your discussion groups. And what I want to do for my bit is to give you more of the theoretical side, and then in your discussion groups I'm going to send you off thinking about the practice of this. Okay, how does this actually work out in practice? What would this look like in my life and in my church if I was living this kind of thing out? Before I go into it, have you all got your Arusha leaflet? Can you put your hand up if you haven't ever heard of Arusha before? Okay, well, for those of you who haven't, Arusha is a Christian conservation charity. It is unique. It's the only organisation in the world that combines practical, hands-on conservation work with a very strongly rooted Christian faith. And for me, it became a bit of a lifeline. When I discovered environmental things and had what I would describe really as being an eco-conversion, I thought I was the only person in the world who was a Christian and who thought the way that I did. And then I came across the folk at Arusha and realised, 17, 18 years ago or so, that actually I wasn't on my own. I wasn't the only Christian. I wasn't completely weird. Well, perhaps I was a little weird, but there were other people who were also weird who I could join in with. And so where you have other organisations that might look at the science of climate change and different environmental issues, or might focus on producing theological reports around the environment, Arusha is very focused on the practical hands-on conservation work all around the world in different countries, 19 different countries. And then here we're focused on some work in Southall, and then we partner with different conservation projects around the country. And my remit as Churches and Theology Director, as Hilary said, is to get this stuff into our churches. I've got a pretty basic manifesto that I live by, I think, and this is my aim, my vision, is that I want to see the UK church get to a place where it is as commonplace for a church to be engaged in issues of wider creation care as it is for it to be engaged in its community. So if you look around the church in this country, you would be hard-pressed now, particularly amongst evangelical churches, to find a church that wasn't involved in its community in some way or another, whether that's food banks or toddler groups or elderly people or street pastors or whatever it might be. If you went to a church that wasn't outward-looking, wasn't involved in its community, you would think that it was deficient in some way as a church, wouldn't you? And that it wasn't quite doing what a church ought to be doing. And I think that that's where the church needs to get to in terms of creation care. So that if you were to go to a church, or if you were to be the minister of a church, or you were to be part of a church that didn't in some way or another practice wider creation care, you would think that in some way it was deficient as a church. And so that's what I kind of live for. Speaking and teaching and writing and equipping and encouraging and motivating and all of those different things. But let's have a look. Caring for creation. Why bother? And I think that we should bother for the very, very simple reason that creation care is a part of the gospel. And so what I want to do in this session together, rather than just taking you through the Bible and pulling out the ecological texts and giving you an ecological theology, which obviously I could do, I want to put environmental care in the broader context of an understanding, of a biblical understanding of the gospel. And so I want us to look at what the gospel is through the biblical narrative and see how creation care fits in as a part of that. So quite a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be basic to you. I know a number of you here are theological students. If what I'm going to say isn't basic to you, then I would worry about the training that you've been having. So I know that quite a lot of what I'm going to say will be basic, but I hope that I'm going to introduce some new things into the midst of that and maybe broaden out our understanding of how we look at the Bible and how we understand what the gospel of Jesus Christ is all about. So I very simply want to start at the beginning of the Bible and work my way through in 45 minutes, even less. So I'm going to try to do this quite quickly. And I realise as well that I completely forgot to bring a Bible with me. So if you've got your Bibles to hand, that would be quite useful. And I might sometimes ask someone to read out a particular verse because I haven't got mine with me. So that would be helpful if you'd join with me and help me out with that. So, in the beginning, as the words of the Bible tell us, God created the heavens and the earth. This isn't the start of a debate about evolution. I know you've had Dennis speaking to you yesterday, so...
coming later.
Oh, is he coming
Keith,
later?
No, Keith is speaking on...
Oh, did it not happen?
Later. Change of programme.
Change of programme, okay. Well, that's fine. So at the moment, you don't know anything about it. So I can say anything, and then you can be put to rights later. Well, so you've got that coming then in your programme, the debate around creation and evolution. And this isn't what Genesis 1 is all about, which I'm sure you'll be looking at, and I'm sure you are very well aware of already. This isn't a debate about evolution. This is simply the statement that whatever view you might hold on how the universe came into being, God was the cause. And that's something that we can all agree on. And the world that God created was, well, what does it tell us in Genesis 1:31? God looked at all that he had made, and it was very good. That's right. He looked at the different individual components, and it was good. Then he put the whole lot together, and he said, it is very good. I like to think that this is a bit of a, well, I was going to say Jewish understatement, but Jews, I'm coming from that background myself, don't go for understatements, do they? But, you know, the kind of prosaic writing of the Old Testament. My very un-Hebraic translation of Genesis 1:31 would be that God looked at all that God had made and said, that is fantastic. I like that. I love it. And in that one little phrase of Genesis 1:31, we see blown apart 2,000 years of faulty theology that has separated out the material from the immaterial, the physical from the ethereal, however you want to put it, the matter from the non-material, if I said that already. And we have lived under a theology that has taught that somehow that which is physical, earthy, material, has substance, is in some way, some sense, inferior to that which is immaterial, what we, actually I think incorrectly, label spiritual, can't be touched. You know what I mean, don't you? And that has come through in so many different ways. It's come through in the way that we view work. The classic thing of those who are in full-time Christian ministry and everybody else who just does a regular job, and it's not quite viewed as quite so important. If I can discipline myself not to digress down this path, it's actually come through in the way that we've viewed men and women. Women being seen as more earthy and physical because of childbirth and periods and that kind of thing. We're seen as much more sort of linked to the earth and to the physical, whereas men historically have been viewed as rational and so less physical, and so there's been that inferiority of women and superiority of men. It's come through in a whole range of different ways when we look through church history, and you may well be able to think of other ways as well. But we see it in our views of creation care, when people say we shouldn't be involved as Christians in looking after this world. That this world isn't important. What's important is saving souls. What's important is getting people off to heaven. And Genesis 1:31 just destroys that whole way of thinking and says that what God has made is very good. This world, this physical reality, don't know if that's the speakers or my hair on the microphone or what, but this physical reality is very, very good. And you might know, and just to say here, I'm coming in completely cold. I have no idea what teaching any of you have had already, so I don't know how much what I'm saying to you is new or whether it's basic or it's whatever, so I don't know. But some of you might know that the creation text that we have in Genesis contrasts very strongly with the dominant creation narratives that were circulating at that time, around the time of the Babylonian exile. Which portrayed the world as evil. We haven't got the time for me to go into that in depth now, but the creation of the world in the Babylonian myth called the Enuma Elish was about how this goddess Tiamat was vanquished by her son Marduk, and it all gets very confusing with marriages and big godly battles and all sorts of things that go on. But Tiamat is conquered, is vanquished, and she is hewn into 3 parts, and this is how the world is created, out of her 3 body parts, the sky and the earth and the waters. And so for the people at that time, the world was inherently evil because it was made out of the evil goddess. See the female coming in again, but that might take us down another line. It was made out of the vanquished evil goddess, and so the world was inherently evil. But what our creation texts are telling us is that the world is good because it comes out of, it is spoken into being by a holy, good God. And so this world is soon teeming with life in the waters, in the air, on the land. And then the final species that God creates is an earthy one, an earth creature, more commonly known as Adam. Adam, you might know, is a play on the Hebrew for earth, Adamah. And I don't know, Hilary, you were looking at yesterday at
We didn't go into
you didn't go into this, okay, that's good. I don't know how much has been covered already. So Adam comes from the earth, Adamah. Like human from the, and I've got to be careful I always get confused between humus and hummus, and I've got to make sure that it's the right one. Humans from the hummus, the humus. and I know which one, and when I try to say it, I always say it in the wrong way. So we are literally earthy ones. We are earth creatures. That is the literal translation of Adam. And interestingly, Adam always has the before it. It's always the Adam. Before Eve is created, Adam is more of a description than a name. So Adam doesn't become a name until after Eve is created, and then you just have Adam. And the words for male and female don't come in until after Eve is created. Before the creation of Eve, you have this one creature, the earthy one, the earthling, not something from Star Trek, but the earth creature. And that is what we are. We are earth creatures. And the similarities between this earth creature and the other living things are many. All of them are blessed to multiply and fill the earth. Did you know that that blessing isn't only something that comes to human beings? All creatures are blessed and told to multiply and fill the earth. Interestingly, all living things have the breath of God in them. I don't know whether you've been brought up to see Genesis 1:20 as when God breathes into Adam, as God breathing God's soul into Adam. That's often how that verse has been interpreted, isn't it? And that's one of our differences, that we have God's breath in us. We have souls, whereas the rest of the created order doesn't have souls. Actually, that's not biblical. The verse of God breathing into Adam's nostrils is just a deeper description of what God talks about earlier. All living things have the breath of God in them, not only human beings alone. And just to pick up on that and digress a little bit, I can't remember which verse it is, but there's a beautiful verse in Proverbs that says, well, the NIV translates it very blandly, as the NIV likes to do, and it says that the righteous man, because it's NIV, the righteous man cares for his animals. But if you look at it literally, it's the righteous person knows the soul of their animals. And it's that same word, nephesh. The righteous person knows their soul. Rada, again, a very deep, intimate knowing. A beautiful description of that connection that we would have with the animals that are around us. So don't be fooled by some people who would say that only human beings have souls. Genesis 1:20, you can't use that to argue that. So there are all sorts of similarities, but there is one difference. Only Adam is made in the image of God. And it's in this description that we learn what makes us uniquely human. And Hilary, again, did you look at the image of God?
We did in some detail, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you...
But do say what you've got to say, because it may be different and it will be another perspective. There's no right...
I doubt. I would never differ from you, Hilary.
Oh,
I'm sure.
I'm sure we can find ways of differing.
So then you will know all about the understanding of image of God coming from the Babylonian inscriptions and from the kings. Wonderful. About it. I mean, that's great, because it means I can skip some of this and go on to some other material, which saves a bit of time. So all about the Babylonian kings being made in the image of the God that they worshipped, and so representing that God to their people, ensuring social harmony, fertility of crops and livestock, and so on. And so we have been created in that image of God in order to represent God to the wider creation. And I just want to look with you at Genesis 1:26 to 28. If you have got your Bibles with you, and I hope you have, then have a look at that. Unless you've got the most recent NIV translation, it will probably say, let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness. And then there's probably a comma. And actually, when I've talked on this in Sweden, there's even a full stop. So let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness, comma, and let them rule over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, and so on. And it's almost as if God had, in God's mind two things. He would create human beings, one, to be in his image, whatever that meant, and he would create them to rule over the birds of the sea and the fish of the air, etc. Following the translation of Chris Wright, the Old Testament scholar who I'm sure you're all very familiar with, the most recent NIV translation has changed that to read, let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea. So that, which creates a causal link between being made in God's image and looking after, ruling over the rest of creation. And it's almost as if God had it in God's mind that the final species he created, he would create with the express purpose of looking after everything else. So that fundamentally is what it means to be human beings. We are that final earth creature created to look after the rest of what God has made. That's our raison d'etre. That's why we're here. in case you get hung up around this idea of dominion, domination, ruling, and so on, the word for rule is the word that God would use of his kings, his idea of the monarchy through the Old Testament. And just throw out to me, what would be some of the words when you think about the kind of kings who God was expecting and looking for? What words would characterise that, the kind of rulership that he was wanting?
Benevolence.
Benevolence.
Justice.
Justice. Someone else said something over here. Oh,
Righteous. Steward.
steward.
Righteous.
Righteous.
Caring.
Caring. All of these kind of ideas. So when we think of what it means for us to rule over the birds of the air and so on, it's not about domination and oppression, is it? It's about benevolence and care and loving justice. Fundamentally, actually, it's about servanthood. We are here as servant kings to serve the rest of what has been made. So we're here to represent God. God's image is an essential part of who we are. And if we represent God's fundamental nature, then that fundamental nature is Trinity, isn't it? Oh, sorry, I might forget which slides I've put up here. That nature is relationships. To be human, as I'm sure you looked at yesterday, is to be in relationship. Beings in communion, as the theologian Zizioulas has put it. Beings in communion is what it means to be human. And those relationships are threefold. It's about our relationship with God, our relationship with other people, and our relationship with the wider creation. And I just want to whiz through the Bible looking at how those three different relationships play out. Because for me, the gospel is about those relationships. It's about those relationships gone wrong and those relationships restored. And we're quite used to thinking about our relationship with God and seeing the gospel as about restoring our relationship with God. But I think that the gospel is broader than that as well. So we were created to be in relationship with God, with other people, with the wider creation. I think we know that full well, that Genesis 3:8, as God walks in the cool of the evening, that beautiful time. It gives us a glimpse of what it should have been like, what it was like, right there at the beginning before it all went horribly wrong. With other people, this earth creature on its own wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for it just to be there. It wasn't enough actually for the earth creature to have communion with God and communion with the wider creation. That earth creature was still lonely and needed one of its own kind in order to be complete, and with the wider creation as we've seen. But it doesn't take long. Only takes 2 chapters before all of those relationships go horribly wrong. And the fall, whether you want to take it literally or metaphorically, it doesn't matter. The fall broke those relationships. Suddenly the human couple was afraid of God and hid from God. Their relationships were fractured. The blame game starts. God tells them that their relationship will be disordered. And communion with the wider creation breaks down too. The snake, which in the Genesis narrative is literally a snake, remember, it's at this point, it's not really Satan. We maybe rightly, maybe not, but we read that in. At this point, the snake is literally a snake. And the snake will now be hated by human beings. We have a snake at home. We've got a royal python. And I know it's fascinating seeing people's instinctual aversion to this creature that actually is completely harmless and very, very beautiful. So it's interesting seeing that. And the ground is now going to be hard to work. And it's going to be dominated by thorns and thistles. I know that in my allotment. Every time I go down there and there are more thorns and thistles, I curse Adam and Eve and what they did to me and how they've subjected me to a life of digging the ground. The earth, as it says in Genesis 3, the earth is cursed because of Adam. Because of Adam, the Adamah is cursed. You see that link there. And then the story of the Old Testament really is the story of those fractured relationships. Many of us will be familiar as reading the Old Testament as a story of Israel and humanity's broken relationship with God. And I won't go into that now, but the Hebrew Scriptures also document the tragic outcomes of the human relational breakdown. And I just put a few verses, but my goodness, I could have quoted pretty much most of the Old Testament, couldn't I? You know, there's some pretty horrendous reading in the Old Testament, isn't there? There's fratricide, there's rape, there's jealousy, there's adultery and murder, there's oppression, there's dishonest trading, there's greed. You name it, whatever you can think of that can go wrong between human beings is there in the Old Testament. But then woven into the relationships between God and humanity is that of humanity's relationship with the wider natural world. And it's interesting that the laws of the Israelite people are clear that it matters how the land and all of the inhabitants of that land are treated. The laws of the Old Testament, yes, are predominantly focused on human beings and on human relationships and on how to maintain a pure relationship with God and how to put that right when that's gone wrong and how to put it to rights when your relationship with another person has gone wrong. But the land and all of its inhabitants are also a part of it as well. For example, the laws of the Sabbath apply more widely to humans, don't they? They also apply to the land and to the animals. They are to rest as well. And if I put up the Deuteronomy one, no, there's another one. Deuteronomy 22 is the little law about a mother bird. Don't take a mother bird sitting on her nest, which I always think is a lovely little thought there. And interestingly, meat eating is only allowed after the story of Noah. Meat eating isn't there in the original creation. Meat eating is a concession of God to the sinfulness of humanity. Is meat eating perhaps the ultimate indication that something is wrong between human beings and the wider creation? There's something for us to discuss. And of course I do keep pigs, so I do eat meat. But I just throw that out.
Yeah.
And the state of the land acts as a kind of spiritual barometer for the health of the Israelites' relationships with God and with each other. And Amos 8 is a good illustration of this. Because the people have turned away from God, so there's a kind of there's a progression here. You know, when the people are not in a right relationship with God, are not righteous, the sign of that, or the outworking of that, is that they don't practice social justice. So one of the key signs that we're in a good relationship with God isn't necessarily that we're spending hours in prayer and hours reading our Bible, though that can be an indication. But according to the Old Testament, one of the key signs that we're in a right relationship with God, that the people of God are righteous, is that they are practicing social justice. And where they are practicing social justice, then all will go well in the land. The crops will produce 100-fold, and the ewes will produce lots of lambs and all of that kind of thing. Amos 8 talks about it conversely. Where the people aren't in a righteous relationship with God, you know that because they're not practicing justice. And then the land responds accordingly. And there's environmental upheaval. Let me just see what I've... And so there are all sorts of references that I could put up here, but I've just put up a few that show the link between what the people do, how they live, and how the land responds. And I'm not taking the time, having said that I might get some of you to read it out. I realise I haven't got the time to look at each of these verses, but I know you're all wonderfully taking notes while I'm talking. So I'm hoping that you might go back and look at some of these things and see how they work together. The land mirrors what is happening between the people and each other, and then the people and God. In contrast, where the people turn away from their wicked ways and where they listen to God, then the trees and the mountains and the hills will rejoice. Isaiah 55. Again, I haven't put that up there, but you can scribble that down. But then where the people aren't practicing social justice, aren't walking closely with their God, then the land mourns. There's really strong language that comes out from the prophetic literature. I haven't put it up here, so you can scribble it down if you want to look at these later. Jeremiah 12 verse 4, Hosea 4 1 to 3, and Jeremiah 4 23 to 28. There's some of, and if you miss all of that, come up and ask me afterwards, are some of the verses that talk about how the land mourns because of the state of the people, because of the unrighteousness of the people. And I don't think that this is simply pretty poetic language. I think there is something in this about the positive or the negative impact on the land when there is peace between people, God and each other. And there's something about how the non-human inhabitants of that land celebrate or mourn when that happens. And I think there's a whole load of thinking that is yet to be done about our connection, our relationship with the wider creation, that takes us, for some of us, might begin to move us into territory that begins to look a bit new agey and that begins to scare us. But I wonder if they have got some things that we have missed out on. And because we have separated ourselves off theologically so strongly between ourselves and the wider natural world, I think we may have missed some connections that are there to be made. Maybe we can explore some of that in our discussion, because I'm really aware that I'm touching on some things here that I haven't got the time to explore. I've got a table of books at the back on the left when you go out. And there's a new book that's come out called Earthed, and I've contributed a chapter to it. And that's beginning to explore some of these things around what we might call a theology of nature connection. And I'd really encourage you to have a look at that, because I think it's got some very interesting things in it. So the land mourns and the land praises. And then there's a different voice, I think, interestingly, that comes through in 2nd Isaiah. And you might well know that probably 2nd Isaiah was written, spoken at around the same time, actually, when our Genesis creation narratives were beginning to take, well, not beginning, were taking the form that we've got them today. And so there's a lot of overlap there that happens. And I was doing some teaching on Isaiah, and I'm trying not to look at Hilary as I do this, because I know she's an expert on this. I was doing some teaching on Isaiah last summer and wanted to have a session where I looked at the creational references. And I knew that in my mind that Isaiah was full of stuff about how God created the world. And so I got my pen and my paper and my Bible so I could jot down all the references, as often, you start off in that way. And I was reading through Isaiah, and I wasn't coming across anything. I was thinking, what's going on? There's nothing in Isaiah about creation. And then there was just one little reference that I came across. And then when I got to Isaiah 40 to 55, suddenly they were all there. And I thought, oh, of course, because because it's a similar time to when our creation narratives were being formed in the way that we've got them today. But what I think is interesting about 2nd Isaiah is that there is no reference there to the image of God, and there's no reference there to the idea of dominion. Yes, there's cultivation, but there's not dominion, which makes me wonder whether, with all that I said at the beginning, the image of God and the dominion side, whether that is one voice for how we look at our relationship with the earth, but that actually biblically there are also other voices that wouldn't see our relationship in quite such a hierarchical way as the image of God can tend to lead us towards. And there would be psalms that speak into that as well, wouldn't there? 84 and 104 off the top of my head, I hope I'm right with that look at us in a much more egalitarian way, placing us on the same level as all the other species that are in this world. So I just throw that out as something that I thought was quite interesting. So the Old Testament finishes on an ambiguous note. The people of Israel are back in their land, the temple is rebuilt, and yet we know that the amazing words of the prophets, They haven't quite been fulfilled, have they? What the prophets were looking for hasn't quite happened. And emerging out of the wreckage of the people's desertion of Yahweh, and then the subsequent destruction of Jerusalem and the taking of their key people into exile, are these amazing words of comfort and hope that begin to come through, that begin to point towards a different time. And I do want to just read out Isaiah 32 to you, of a time when the Spirit is poured on us from on high. The desert becomes a fertile field. The fertile field seems like a forest. Justice will dwell in the desert, and righteousness live in the fertile field. The fruit of righteousness will be peace. The effect of righteousness will be quietness and confidence forever. There's a lovely interweaving here of the justice and the wider creational aspects there. And so the Hebrew prophets begin to look forward to this time of peace, of shalom, when the harmonious relationships established right back in the beginning would be put back to rights again. And crucially, of course, they begin to envisage that this time would be brought about by one particular person, specially chosen and anointed by God. Familiar to us all, I know. And then about 400 years later, one night, a large company of angels bursts into song in front of some very surprised shepherds, and they proclaim that there is glory for God in highest heaven, and on earth there is peace among the people whom God has favoured. And you know, these words about peace, they're not just the angels' way of saying, "Hi shepherds, we're here." You know, they're not just a kind of nice, "Hello, here we are, have a look at us, we've got something to tell you." Those words about peace are like a great big flashing neon sign telling the shepherds and the world that the hopes of the Old Testament prophets are being fulfilled in a very particular newborn baby. And the good news that those shepherds came to proclaim, we know, is that through Jesus there is peace. Through his life, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, all these things together have brought about reconciliation. And that reconciliation happens on these three levels, with God, with each other, and with the wider creation. I don't need to go into how that reconciliation happens with God, do I? That's the very stuff of our Christian faith. But it is worth just mentioning that Jesus also came to restore our relationships with each other, and I've just highlighted a few of the verses that speak into that. Jesus' death has broken down the dividing wall that stands between us, racially, gender, class, all those different things that Galatians 3:28 talks about, and Ephesians 2, breaking down that dividing wall of hostility. And he came to restore the broken relationship between ourselves and the wider creation. And this is the meaning of Romans 8, verses 19 to 21. Creation has been subject to frustration because of humanity's fall. And so when we know what it means truly to be children of God, when we are set free to be the children of God that we were designed to be, that God has called us to be, then we will be set free to fulfill our original calling, to look after the rest of the wider world well. And so as we do that, then the whole creation will be set free. The theologian Colin Gunton once said, "We human creatures are at the centre of the world's problems, and it's only by our redirection that will the whole creation be set free." So yes, the cross is focused on us, but maybe not necessarily because we're the most important. Maybe it's focused on us because we're the ones who messed up, and we're the ones who need to be set free in order that we can then fulfill our wider calling. Colossians 1:19 to 20 makes very clear that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross for all things in heaven and on earth. I don't know how many times I read Colossians 1:19 to 20. Growing up as a good Christian, Bible-based evangelical, I'm from pedigree missionary stock, you know, going back through the generations, did my daily Bible reading, read the Bible through, I don't know how many times before I reached 6, you know, that kind of thing. And I would have read Colossians 1:19 to 20 so many times. And I always read that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross for me and for you and for all human beings. Now, I still believe that. Don't worry. Absolutely, fundamentally, Jesus died for us. But then it took me quite by surprise when I realised that it doesn't actually say that. It says that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross for all things in heaven and on earth. Paul's way, basically, of saying for everything. For all things. And coming into that, although I haven't put this up here, then we look towards the future and we think of those passages in Revelation that give us a little glimpse into the heavenly dimension. Revelation 4, where we see the whole creation worshipping God together with human beings as one part of that egalitarian levelling, again, that we see in Isaiah. We are part of the wider creation. And passages like Revelation and 3 verse 10 has gone out of my head whether it's 1 or 2. Ah, I caught you. Yeah, thank you. They don't talk about the destruction of this earth. They talk about its renewal. They talk about, yes, the refining fire of judgment, but what happens when there is a fire? What happens is that all of the impurity is burnt away so that all that is good can come through. My husband is a jeweller. He's been very involved in fair trade gold. He's pioneered ethical gold. He's got an amazing story of the adventures and the different things that he has done. Have a look. His autobiography is over on the back there. Fascinating journey into an area that we don't know very much about. And he could tell you all about how you refine gold. And you don't thereby destroy the whole product, do you? You get rid of the dross so that what is good might come through. And it's the same for us when we think about this world and the coming judgment. This world is not going to be fully destroyed. All that is bad is going to be destroyed so that what is good can be found, can be rediscovered. And then our final resting place isn't on some ethereal floating heaven somewhere playing a harp sitting in the clouds. Thank goodness. That always used to freak me out when I was a child, that I thought I was going to spend eternity in something like that. Our final resting place is going to be on the renewed, the transformed heaven and earth together. An awful lot of theology and biblical understanding just packed together there, isn't there? And I'm aware of the time, so I can't unpack that fully now. Although I do hope that that most of what I just said there isn't new and isn't a revelation. If it is, or if you want to look at any of that, I've brought some Bible material that covers some of these things and would help you unpack that kind of thinking in more detail than I've had time to do today. But peace with God, peace with others, peace with the wider creation, that's what Jesus came to bring about. And the amazing news is that as we work towards that in our own life, we then have peace with ourselves too, which I think is a beautiful rounding off of those relationships. And so for me, it's this 3-dimensional, or 4-dimensional if you want the peace with yourself bit as well, it's this relational understanding that defines who I am and what I do. As I come to a conclusion, put very simply, I want to live my life in such a way that my relationships with God, my relationships with other people, my relationships with the wider natural world, yes, and my relationship with myself, that all of those relationships are being developed rather than stunted. And so that leads me to give time and attention to all of those different things, to my interior life with God, to how I treat people, both those I know who live near me and those who live thousands of miles away who grow my chocolate or pick my tea or grow my rice or my cotton for my t-shirts or whatever it is, and to how I live in this world. And I hope it's obvious that this framework provides us with a truly full understanding and holistic understanding of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Worship, evangelism, the spiritual disciplines, social justice, campaigning, ethical consumerism, spending time outside in the natural world, practically helping people who are poorer than me financially, and so on. All of these things and more are natural outworkings of this relational scheme. And the wonderful thing is that I don't actually see any of them as having priority. So let's just throw out of the window now all the debates about what's more important. Should I be evangelising? Should I be practicing social care? Should I be planting trees? What a waste of time to have those debates. I'm sorry, but stop debating these things. Just get on and do them, and then we might be in a better position. They all blend together into one harmonious whole, and that whole is weakened if any of those things are missing in our lives. And so this isn't about pitting one thing against another, evangelism against community engagement, or poverty relief against environmental care, or a life of prayer against a life of action. A life sold out to the gospel of Jesus Christ will do all of these things and more, not out of a sense of duty, but out of a sense of love for our Trinitarian Creator, God. And so why should we bother caring for creation? Well, very simply, because it's part of the gospel. And we're back on 10 o'clock.
Great, Ruth. Let's thank Ruth for her inspiring talk.